And so hello, everyone, and welcome to the Pennsylvania Lumber Museum's Fabric and Fiber in Pennsylvania's Forest program, year 2022. This is a program where we take a look at some of the objects in our collection and photographs in our archives with a keen eye toward what people working in the Pennsylvania lumber industry were wearing and how they were maintaining and washing those clothes, where they were purchasing them. This is all in conjunction with the Galeton's chapter of Worldwide Knitting and Public Day, with that coming up this weekend. We, as a community-focused museum, like to do what we can to support other initiatives that are happening in and around our area. And we're grateful when we are invited and asked to be part of things like that. I think that's a great use of our time and resources. So Linda Plummer, thank you very much for the invite, and ask for our participation. I can't talk today, and we're happy to be here. So I hope everyone enjoys. We did give this program last year. It will be, similar to what we did last year. So if you saw it then, hopefully you can critique us now and tell us if we've improved at all. We are recording the program here, and the recording will be available after the fact to share. I will send out a link to everyone that registered for the program to get access to the video on the museum's YouTube channel after the program here is done. So without further ado, I will let our museum curator, Josh Fox, give his portion of the presentation first. I will turn things over to him. And thank you, Josh. Take it away.
All right, yes, thank you. So let me get my screen up here. So I'm going to be talking about the Woolwich Clothing Company with a focus on some of the items that are in the museum's collection. So if you're not familiar, Woolwich is an outdoor clothing company, and they were based for many years in Woolwich, Pennsylvania, which is really not too far away from our museum site. And so when we start talking about, so really in 1811, John Rich immigrated from England to Germantown, Pennsylvania. Now, Rich was a roll carter by trade. So it was his job to straighten roll fibers in preparation for spinning. England at the time had a pretty robust and actually industrializing wool industry at the time. And when he came over to America, John brought the trade of roll carding over. He had learned this trade from his father, so this was kind of coming down as for a bit of the family business. So he worked this many years, and then by 1830, he partnered with a Daniel McCormick, and they built a water-powered woolen mill on the Little Plum Run in Clinton County, Pennsylvania. And the picture on the left here is that original mill. So this is the first home of the Woolwich Clothing Company. It still exists today, but really, as you see, it really didn't serve the purpose for too long, because they were able to grow the business. So John Rich, he built the business first by traveling to lumber camps, which is a good connection for us, and to farms in the local area. Obviously, the farms around the way, but then the lumber camps at the time, lumber camps were often out in the woods, kind of by definition, and pretty isolated. So you weren't able to run to the store, and a lot of times some traveling peddlers would come to you. And so that was how John Rich really started promoting his business. He would go sell the wool fabric, sell socks and yarn from the back of a mule cart, and really by getting out there, that's kind of how the business got a good foothold. And that little Plum Run mill quickly proved to be too small, and a new mill was opened on nearby Chatham Run, which this mill opened in 1845, by which point John Rich was sole owner of the operation, having bought out his partner. This site was originally known as Factoryville and then later Richville, but by 1888, it became known as Woolwich, Pennsylvania, and that is still the town name today. So you can go and visit Woolwich, Pennsylvania. And here's a photograph of the mill in Woolwich in 1887. So probably the most iconic image of Woolwich is known as for their buffalo check pattern. It's, if you think of a lumberjack and you picture what they might be wearing, chances are you picture them wearing a buffalo check shirt. So this iconic look for wood hicks and lumberjacks across the world, the red and black pattern, it was introduced by Woolwich in 1850. It was inspired by Scottish tartans, and the buffalo check shirt was one of the first finished products sold by Woolwich. So as I mentioned before, he would go around, he was selling just wool fabric or yarn, and the odd sock or so, but this shirt was one of the first ready-made pieces of clothing that would have been sold off the rack, as it were, by Woolwich. And this says that legend says that the designer of the buffalo check pattern actually owned a herd of buffalo. So that's kind of where the name came from. Here we have a fabric sample in the buffalo check pattern from the Woolwich Company. This probably dates about 1960s or so. So most of what I'll be talking about is from a donation from Woolwich to the Pennsylvania Lumber Museum. In 1970, when we were getting prepared to open the museum, our museum had a kind of a soft opening. Our visitor center opened in 1970, and the museum had a grand opening 50 years ago in 1972. So in preparation to help build our collection, a curator from the Pennsylvania Historical Museum Commission, PHMC, requested information from the Woolwich Company. And in response, the president of Woolwich at the time, Roswell Brayton, who was a descendant of John Rich, the Rich families eventually married into the Braytons, he sent along a return of donation of some catalogs and some fabric samples. But in the donation request, the curator wrote that, "I understand the material and style of the clothing changed very little." Well, Mr. Brayton did not seem to appreciate that. In this letter, it was his kind of response, mentioning, he says that, it says, "It is true that some of our basic heavier outerwear items have not changed such over the years. However, Woolwich's line as a whole has changed tremendously and become extremely diversified. We add new numbers every year and drop out others. For your information, Woolwich is deeply involved in making fashion outerwear for men that changes almost as frequently as that for women." So I guess they maybe he took a little offense that they didn't change very much. But having said that, there are some images of Woolwich that we'll see, that when you think of that when you see something, you think, oh, that's going to be a Woolwich product. So the earliest catalog that we were given is this 1912 order form. So saying this kind of illustrates a little bit about maybe what Mr. Brayton was talking about, going from clothing that was specifically designed for kind of working outdoors something that the lumberjacks would have found and worn, to more of the leisurely outdoorsman, which was a pretty newer concept around the turn of the 20th century. Now they're targeting not the men that have to be outdoors for work or the way of life, but people who want to be outdoors uh, for more leisurely pursuits, even though such as hunting, which you can obviously hunt for subsistence, but you could also hunt for sport as well. As this gentleman is obviously set up, this, it's entitled "The Hunter's Favorite Clothing." And so here you can see some more of the order form. And what's nice about this order form is that it includes some samples, some fabric samples in it. Now, when the initial request for samples to the Woolwich Company was made, Mr. Brayton's response was that they really didn't have too many old samples that they kept laying around, or at least not that they were probably willing to part with. But this catalog does include samples from 1912. So here we have probably the oldest example of Woolwich fabric in our collection. And these catalogs, the next few catalogs you'll see, kind of show Woolwich in the Jazz Age. These are from the 1920s. And again, are kind of highlighting some of the more fashionable aspects of this. As you can see in here, we're highlighting the many different patterns that a shirt is available in. But then you can also see that, the buffalo check is still one of those patterns. And again, this is a 1926 catalog. And probably what it stands out to me the most is, this is toggery for outer sportswear. You don't really hear clothing referred to as toggery too much anymore. And I just think it's kind of delightful, and I will start referring to it as such. But even at this point in 1926, this catalog is highlighting that Woolwich has been around for 96 years already at this point. So highlighting the long tradition of it. And even down here, you can see men, wood hicks, working in the forest. One man with using a single crosscut saw, the other sharpening his double bit axe, kind of showing the heritage of Woolwich, even in this catalog that's designed more for the outdoor skiing and adventure set. Some of the fashion patterns available, different colors as well, and even highlighting that some of the are meant for men and women. So a couple of women are featured in this as well, so showing that branching out, not just for your woodsman. And then a 1927, 1928 catalog, again highlighting kind of more the winter outdoors, skiing, and talking about the upcoming centennial for 1930. Some of the items, the kind of the traditional socks, staple for Woolwich. Robes and blankets. Probably going back, one of the big things that really helped grow Woolwich in its earlier years was that Woolwich had contracts with the Union Army during the Civil War for wool blankets. So that wool blankets have always been a large part of Woolwich's business. Then on the right, we see some beautiful golf toggery at frontward again, and just highlighting, how they're trying to diversify some of the vest with knickers. And I try to tell my wife that that's still acceptable golf wear, but she's not buying it. I'm a little disappointed by such things. And again, sports togs of style and enduring wear for the season of 1929 to 1930. And again, just the shift of out from outdoorsmen to more leisurely activities, leisurely outdoor pursuits, fishing, golfing, skiing, swimming, going sledding. And then a nice illustration of of the factory at the time, around 1930. And this is, if you were to go around to Woolwich today, you'd still see some of this factory around. And that brings us to the Pennsylvania tuxedo. Probably the most iconic of Woolwich takes their buffalo check and just says, what if everything was buffalo check? And Woolwich made its all wool hunting suit in buffalo check. So everything from hats to the hunting coat to the breeches to vests. So this, became very popular with hunters at the time, around the middle of the 20th century, and became such a popular seller that it did develop the nickname the Pennsylvania tuxedo. And that's something you can still really find. If you look around to antique stores, you can still find some of these floating around. And then beachwear too. I don't know if I want my beachwear made out of wool, but if you wanted some wool beachwear, Woolwich had you covered. From men's swimming trunks with zippers, again, not something I necessarily need in my beachwear, but to robes as well. So again, trying to branch out and not be, limited as to what they offer. And then more the automobile robes and bathrobes. Just again, of course, your automobile robes when you're going down in your fancy convertibles in the early days of the Depression. Finishing up with your bed blankets for your separate twin beds, and the complete line of hosiery. Now, one of the actual items that we do have is this hunting jacket, which might have been at one point part of a Pennsylvania tuxedo set. It's a mid-20th century hunting jacket made by Woolwich in the buffalo check pattern. And the interesting thing with this is if you notice the tag reads emergency garments. And this indicates that this jacket was made during World War II with reprocessed or remnant wool. The new wool at the time would have been reserved for the war effort. Again, just like with the Civil War, Woolwich was making a lot of wool blankets for the army at this time. And they got precedence with all new wool, but people still needed clothing to wear. And so they were able to get some permission to use the reprocessed or remnant wools to make these jackets. And then this tag emergency garment indicates that this was properly made following these guidelines and standards, that this wasn't some waste of new wool. It was an approved garment that did not take away from the war effort. And then that brings us to kind of the end of an era, no longer made in the USA. So at the time of Woolwich's 175th anniversary in 2005, the mill in Woolwich, Pennsylvania was America's oldest continuing operating wool mill, having opened in 1845. The Woolwich, PA mill continued to produce wool blankets long after other US locations had closed. During the 20th century, Woolwich had expanded across the United States with other factories to meet their clothing demand. But most of these had already closed, and clothing production had moved overseas. The last remaining Woolwich mill in the United States was the Woolwich, Pennsylvania mill, making blankets and wool fabrics. And then in 2019, the descendants of John Rich, the Brayton family and other descendants, had sold off control of the company. It sold to an Italian company, and the Woolwich, Pennsylvania closed, ending 174 years production and putting an end to 189 years of Woolwich being made in the United States. So it's just the kind of the history of the Woolwich Company, showing how it ties into Pennsylvania's lumber heritage by virtue of being not their clothing not only for used for possibly for wood hicks and lumbermen, but also outdoorsmen and women, and those who like to get out in Pennsylvania forests as well. So Pennsylvania Company making clothing to be worn in Pennsylvania's forests. And ta-da! So that is the end of that, and I will turn it back over to Josh Roth.
All right, thank you, Josh Fox. We will pause here. Any questions for Josh Fox about his presentation on Woolrich before we move into my piece of this evening's program? I think it is a fascinating history relative to that manufacturer. Obviously a very storied brand, and as you alluded to, one that is very often associated with Pennsylvania lumber industry. So very interesting. If you have questions, feel free to type them into the chat. We can always circle back around as we get toward the end of the program. But I'm going to take over now and start sharing as well. I have pulled a selection of images from our photographic archives. And we're going to sort of talk about, what wood hicks were wearing, and do a little dive into how they were caring for those clothes. I know just as this year, as with last year, there was a presentation for laundry camp, sort of talking about how to properly launder and maintain clothing. So we're going to dive into that from a Pennsylvania wood hick perspective as well. So laundry in a lumber camp. Let's start with that aspect of it. Lumber camps, by definition, were, in these remote and hard to reach areas. You had to work where the trees were that you were harvesting, and more often than not, that was the wilderness. So in order to be able to do that, you can't simply live in your house with your family, your wife and your kids, and walk to work every day. You need to live where the trees are. So as part of that, creating a lumber camp was sort of creating your own little community in your own space that you occupied while you were doing that type of work. And lumber camps had to have all the necessities, all the structures and components of any other community that the wood hicks needed to complete not only their jobs, but their day-to-day life. And laundry was most definitely one of those considerations. So here is our laundry shed at the Pennsylvania Lumber Museum, and a shameless plug for my daughter, who will help out from time to time with laundry demonstrations. We do that during special events to give folks a taste of what historic laundry was like, using the washboard and a big iron tub suspended over a fire. And I think the next time we will be doing that will likely be our fall show in October, if you'd like to stop over and check it out sometime. Our laundry shed, compared to what most Pennsylvania wood hicks would have been using to wash their laundry, is probably pretty elaborate. This next slide is more indicative of what laundry day in a lumber camp probably would have been like. So you can see here really no special structures. We just have a kettle here that is producing a whole bunch of steam. That's our hot water, several buckets for rinsing and washing, and then just some pieces of branch or skinned logs to suspend the clothing on to dry. These two gentlemen are working in tandem to wring out the laundry. And there's, when we set up our lumber camp, we tried to, or our laundry station, we tried to mirror these historic photos as much as possible. We've got the big tub and we've got the washboard, just like my daughter was using. So this is likely more indicative of what a laundry in a lumber camp would have been like. You can kind of see here one interesting piece of this, which we'll get into in terms of what wood hicks were wearing. This gentleman seems to be pretty well dressed for laundry day. More often than not, wood hicks in lumber camps did not have really more than one change of clothes. So this, because it's laundry day, may be the only other thing that this gentleman has to wear. So that's what he's wearing to do his laundry. Sometimes the laundry was nothing more than a kettle to catch water at the base of a spring. So that's exactly what you can see here. You have the spring coming down the mountainside. You have these gentlemen with the large catch basin and then individual buckets, and then some of the other laundry accoutrement here. Again, these gentlemen seem to be following that same pattern. They're pretty well dressed for a chore like laundry, but again, these might be the only other change of clothes that they have. So probably not a whole lot of choice. The text here also mentions, that was definitely a consideration with where to locate your lumber camp when you were getting ready to begin cutting of the forest. They were typically located between the rail line in the valley bottom and a spring coming down from the mountainside. The spring, having a fresh source of water for the lumber camp was very important. Obviously, everyone likes to drink, and you need water for laundry, water for cooking. And if you have the wherewithal, I have here, you can also build a spring house, which is used to help store the perishable items. This is a photo not of Pennsylvania, but of Minnesota, near Deer River. But very much of the ilk of a Pennsylvania lumber camp. Again, just more photographic evidence showing that this was not a complex operation, just a kettle suspended over a cross beam here. And if I zoom in on this, you can see it looks like this is a relatively well-used laundry station. You can see that the fire has really done a number on the cross beam here after probably many sessions of laundry and smoke. And in the background here, we can see some of the clothes hanging out to dry. And your guess is as good as mine as to how well the clothing dried in this type of condition, where obviously you have a significant amount of snow on the ground and it was probably pretty cold. But again, that's what was available to these folks when they were wood hicks, when they were stationed in their lumber camps. This is also a photo from Minnesota, but very much the same. I like this one because we can see here, the bucket that he is using is obviously repurposed from, something else, some other supply that had come into camp. But, now that whatever was in there is used, it makes a good bucket for laundry. So, all the men doing their own laundry. Again, this is probably pretty common because most of these lumber camps were pretty remote. There was nobody else to do your laundry for you. If you didn't do it, it didn't get done. And here again, we can see over this tree stump here, we've got, either stuff waiting to be washed or possibly other clothes that are just spread out to dry. This is an interesting one. When I first was going through images in the photographic archives, I thought perhaps this was someone getting ready to do laundry with a pack of laundry on his back. But the more I looked at it and sort of looked at the spout on this kettle, this doesn't appear to be laundry day activity. This looks more like the cook's assistant, the camp cookie, probably with a backpack or basket full of lunches and food items for the men, and a big pot of coffee, since it's obviously, again, cold outside with snow on the ground. So yes, indeed, fortunate that someone took photos on laundry day. We're very lucky. We, as a bit of background, we have over 2,500 images in our photographic archive. And we're very lucky that lumber industry at its height was kind of happening at a point in history where photography was relatively common. So, it's those historic sites or museums in our system that talk about a much earlier period of history, like Pensbury Manor, talking about William Penn, pre-photographs, probably have a much more difficult time sort of defining the minutia of life than we do, especially with all these great photos that we can just zoom in on and really dig into. So he looks more like a cookie taking lunch rather than laundry, but that it initially kind of threw me. So, uh-oh, that was not what I wanted to do. Here we are. So, a few notes about laundry, and I'm going to read from primary source documents before we move on to what wood hicks were wearing. Like the photographic evidence, we are fortunate to have a variety of firsthand accounts and oral histories of folks that were working in the lumber industry. And it really gives a sense of what wood hicks were wearing and how they were maintaining their clothing. So an account from Elmer Riggle, who worked for jobber George Wilkinson in the Black Forest area of Lycoming County near Slate Run in the 1890s, said, "I would buy a pair of overalls and wear them until they wore out. I never washed them. We washed our shirts on Sundays in Indian Run and dried them by hanging them on bushes." So as I move through this, you'll see there's some common themes here. We have multiple accounts of folks working in the lumber industry maintaining that they never washed their pants. So, they would buy a pair of pants, they would just use them until they were threadbare and worn out, throw them away and get a new pair of pants. No sense washing them. A lot of what was being washed, as we can parse out, was shirts and socks. So again, if you did have a change of clothing, you probably had one pair of pants, two shirts, and two pairs of socks. So if you're going to wear your one pair all week, take your shirt and socks off, change into your cleans, wash the dirties, and then, repeat the process next week on Sunday. In 1891, a reporter visited the lumber camp run by Bert Lynch in Clinton County and noted that workers stayed in camp for weeks or months with no visits to home. Work was 6 days a week, but never on Sunday. On that day, clothes were washed in big kettles outside. So again, we've got a reporter sort of echoing what we're seeing in the photographs in our archive, these big kettles suspended right outside, washing out in the open air, and then sort of verifying again that because of the work schedule and the demands of what these men were doing, even if they wanted to perhaps wash their clothing midweek, they probably didn't have time. So Sunday was your day off. Sunday was also the day to get your clothing clean. Clyde Lynch talks about his father, Bert, and his lumber camp, and also notes that everyone had to do their own washing in a big iron or copper kettle outside. So again, the fact that these are remote, most of the men, once you're in camp, you stayed there, you didn't go out, and other people oftentimes didn't come in. So if you didn't do your own laundry, it didn't get done. Anna Eckert was a camp cook in Elk County in the early 1900s and provides a more feminine perspective on the laundry. She notes that men had two pair of socks and underwear, which they rotated weekly, as I mentioned earlier, and that overalls were rarely washed. So it's not just the men that are recounting that we didn't wash our pants. The women that were in camp were there to verify that and back that assertion up as well. Henry Eckert, who was her husband, noted that you generally washed every Sunday, those old hicks, as he refers to them. I always came out of camp home to my father and mother on Sunday every 2 or 3 weeks. They had a couple tubs and a washboard. So just as we might have a child returning home from college with their laundry every couple of weeks, we also had Henry Eckert returning to his parents' house to do his laundry as well. He was a teamster in the camp that he worked in, driving horses. Leo Bailey is our final note here. He was just a child in Latonia between 1894 and 1910. That's Tioga County. And he notes This is also relative to personal hygiene and personal washing. So far as I know, there was only one bathtub in town. It was at the mill superintendent's house, one of the larger houses in town. When we bathed, it was in a large wooden wash tub used at other time for laundry purposes. So did Wood Hicks also use the laundry tubs for bathing? We don't have any photos of that, I guess, thankfully. But, it stands to reason that if it was good enough for young Leo Bailey, it might have been good enough for the occasional Wood Hick if he was exceptionally dirty. So on to more specifics about the clothing we're seeing here. This is an earlier account, so I will read it aloud as it is on the screen. The clothing of the woodsman varies in form, but all wear the long stockings drawn up to the knee over the trousers, where they are held in place by either straps or by a red cord with tassels. Heavy rubber shoes cover the feet. The shoes are usually 1 or 2 sizes too large in order to admit of the person wearing 2 or more pairs of coarse woolen socks beneath the long red outside hose. In the spring during the drive, that's log driving, boots are worn with a strap buckled around their tops to prevent the water from finding too easy ingress. The soles and heels of these driving boots are filled with spikes from 1/2 inch to 1.5 inches in length, the longest spike being set at the heel. They wear heavy, coarse woolen shirts, slouch hats, or knit caps with tassels, depending their form, altogether presenting a somewhat picturesque appearance. And that is from a history of Potter County that is recounting the period from about 1850 to 1880 or 1890. It was published in 1890 by J.H. Beers and Company. And the author, I think here, is describing a type of dress that is much more characteristic of a northern logger. So someone either in Canada, New England, Maine, Massachusetts, Upper New York. Lumber industry was happening earlier there than it was in Pennsylvania. So as Pennsylvania's lumber industry starts to grow, we start seeing people transplants from those other areas. As their industry is either winding down or not going as voraciously as it might once have been, these folks are looking for work, and they are drifting south into Pennsylvania and bringing with them their very characteristic style of dress. Because this is an earlier period, again, back to the prevalence of photographs, most of our photographs aren't of that time period. That's very early. So there's not a whole lot of photographic evidence in the archives to back up this type of style of dress for Wood Hicks working in Pennsylvania. But, I don't doubt the author. I just think that, as the people who were doing the work changed, the style of dress probably changed too. So as more native Pennsylvanians or people from other portions of the state move potentially north into Potter County, and we get immigrants from England and Europe and other places emigrating into the United States and bringing their dress with them, by the 1880s or 1890s, when we really see an explosion in the Pennsylvania lumber industry, the dress is a little bit different than what's described here. I have a few photos here to sort of hopefully back up that assertion of mine with the research I've been able to do. The one on the left is a Maine image, log driving, and the one on the right and below is Michigan. So you can see, to a degree, what was described in that photograph, sort of these long outer boots that are sort of tied closed to keep the water out, these sort of smaller slouch hats. This gentleman obviously has a wider brimmed hat, but a lot of the Michiganders are dressed in the same way, and sort of, as people move south from Canada into that area and into their lumber industry, they're probably picking up a lot of the same. So, Pennsylvania, a little bit different. Let me zoom back out here. This is an image from PA, and this is one of the only ones that I could find that sort of has that, this gentleman here in that more early style of dress that was described. Now, oddly enough, let me grab my notes here. This photo is not an early photo. This is, where am I? Forest County, Pennsylvania, in the early 20th century. So this is not, 1850 to 1880s, but This gentleman is still kind of, dressed in that similar style that was described in the early account of what log drivers were wearing. And another interesting and fun thing in this image is this gentleman and this gentleman here obviously shop at the same store because they're wearing identical jackets. So, and I looked at my notes. One thing I forgot to mention that is just, I find really amusing. The one image of them doing laundry in Minnesota, when we looked at the back, the image was labeled Hicks doing laundry, disposing of cooties. So I thought that was a wonderful turn of phrase that the person who was labeling that photograph at the time decided to put in there. So here again is this question: when did regional styles of dress change? That description that we have of that earlier sort of French Canadian or New England style of dress in a wood hick or a lumberjack is different than the majority of photos that we have from Pennsylvania. So I don't know that there's a fast and steady answer. Two things to compare here. We've got two images. The one on the left was taken in a studio. You can see it's a painted backdrop. The one on the right was taken in the woods. The one on the left is dated 1892 from St. Croix, Minnesota, and the subject is labeled as Arthur J. McIvy, Cruiser and Logger. The other photo on the right is from the early 1900s and is from the 9 Mile, so very close proximity to where the Pennsylvania Lumber Museum is located today. So it's a difference of about, a little less than 20 years, but half a country apart. And both of these gentlemen are dressed in a very similar manner, and a manner that's not really, in line with what that earlier description from the early Potter County history is talking about. This is much more indicative of the majority of photographs of men working in the lumber industry that we have in terms of how they're dressed. One of the accounts here that I will read to you, Clyde Lynch continues. We heard a little bit about the washing there. He talks a little bit more about what the Hicks in his camp were wearing, and this is circa 1910 to 1915. He says, in the summer, the lumbermen wore long wool shirts to catch the perspiration. In the winter, they wore the big plaid so-called lumber shirts, right? So obviously, as Josh was talking about earlier, that buffalo check plaid pattern from Woolrich, very much associated with lumber industry, even at the time too. The people that were there, were calling them lumber shirts, those that were working in the industry. And then he goes on, one of their pride and joys were their shoes, Wisconsin shoes. They were corked shoes, that means spikes on the bottom, and they cost a lot of money. I think they cost between $12 and $18. So that got me thinking and researching what company in Wisconsin is making these tall Wisconsin style boots that we see in a lot of the images that we have. One of the ones with the longer history that I was able to find was in the image here, this Weinbrenner and Pfeffer. A little bit about their history. Founded by Albert Weinbrenner, the son of a German immigrant and cobbler. He began his apprenticeship at age 13, working for his father, and by his 20s, in his spare time, he was designing work boots, specifically for the trade jobs his friends around the Milwaukee, Wisconsin area. In 1892, at the age of 27, so right in line with the photographs that we have and the account of what Wood Hicks were wearing from Mr. Lynch. At the age of 27, Albert started his own cobbler business with partner Joseph Pfeffer. Weinbrenner and Pfeffer enjoyed immediate success, becoming well known for their newfangled jobber boots they made. So, for us in the lumber industry and at the exhibit, when we're talking about a jobber, we're talking about someone who was in charge at the lumber camp, the person that owned most of the equipment and contracted with the timber owners, hired the crew of Wood Hicks to come in, build the camp, and cut down the trees. So here they're, in Wisconsin, if you're in the place, you probably don't refer to them as Wisconsin boots because that's every boot in Wisconsin, but they're referring to them as jobber boots. So from the start, innovation and craftsmanship have been at the heart of the company's success. By 1908, Weinbrenner's reputation for making quality, affordable work boots expands tremendously. So again, you hear Lynch talking about one of their pride and joys, one of the things that they coveted were these really well-crafted, well-made, high-quality boots. And the company's history sort of echoes that in terms of the reputation that went along with them. As a result, 5 distribution centers are built around the country to help ensure speedy delivery of footwear to customers. This is when the famed Wing and Wheels logo is born. Back then, and even more today, it symbolizes our determination to be self-reliant and steadfast to react to our customers' needs. Isn't that wonderful? They're really selling themselves in their company history there. But, it's, when we have Mr. Lynch talking about Wisconsin boots, could be very likely he's referring to this company. And in this image, I selected this one. This is also from the 9 Mile, that you can see this gentleman has on a pair of very long high-top leather boots that look very much like the example that was provided in that historic image from Weinbrenner. Back to some of the other descriptions, this image especially is common of that account from Anna Eckert talking about back to Lynch's account, where he says that in the summer, lumbermen wore long wool shirts to catch the perspiration. So again, we've got leaves on the trees here. We can presume it's at least spring, but to a man, each one of these gentlemen is wearing essentially what we would refer to today as like a long underwear style shirt. So sort of this wool, long sleeves, very simple shirt, but apparently good at catching perspiration and ubiquitous in many of the photographs that we have from that period. Again, some of the accounts that we heard from before, Elmer Riggle goes on to say, we wore underclothes shirts, is what he calls them. Most of the lumbermen wore corked shoes. Those are the ones with the spikes. And now and then there would be one who didn't. So, I don't know what that means. He didn't elaborate, but you can see, again, if we're moving on, a couple interesting items of clothing. Some of these folks, different footwear, different styles. Definitely a big patch of the buffalo check pattern here among the clothing of some of these gentlemen in the center of the image. This one was significant to me in the fact that there weren't that many long underwear shirts. So if you look at these gentlemen, it's kind of hard to tell under the jacket of some of these guys, perhaps this person, maybe this one, but a lot of them aren't wearing those shirts. Is that because they knew the photographer was coming into camp that day and they wanted to wear something a little nicer? Not entirely sure, but definitely, we see those reoccurring themes. A lot of these gentlemen have the very high, sort of what they're referring to as jobber or Wisconsin style boots, the buffalo plaid, not the slouch hats and tassels and the other things that were described earlier, but very much of the time. This is McGuire's Lumber Camp in Potter County. Let me try and zoom back out here. Next slide. This is from the Zimmerman collection, likely Lycoming or Clearfield counties. Definitely underwear shirts in this image, but my favorite part of this one is this gentleman right in the middle. It clearly looks like it is some type of knit sweater that he is wearing here, probably homemade. So while most of the other gentlemen in camp opt for that sort of ubiquitous underwear shirt style, he's got some type of homemade striped wool sweater on. And when you're looking at this image and sort of scrolling through, he pops out immediately. He's also, got quite a bit of style, I think. He's got his hat slouched off to the side, sort of an insignia or buckle there in the very front. I guess there's been fashionistas as long as there's been fashion, but this gentleman, out of everyone in this photo, definitely appears to be someone who is more concerned with his appearance than perhaps some of the others. The other thing I started thinking about as I was looking through the historic photo archives and looking at what folks were wearing was how job sort of indicated, the specifics of the job you were doing indicated the type or style of clothing that you're wearing. So these men were all log deckers. The gentleman on the right is probably the teamster. He's got a team of horses and he's dragging the logs down the skid road you can see in the background there down the mountain. And these men are using their peavies that they have to stack them up into the neat landing that you have behind them. There's a few tricks that we use in when we're trying to date photos. When landings are decked very neatly like this, it usually means it's pre-mechanical log loader. So when you were using a Barnhart log loader or another mechanical loader, like the one we have in our collection, you didn't need to stack the landings up neatly like this. Those landings were referred to as rough and tumble, and we will see some of those in later images. But when you were loading by hand, it was very much beneficial to have everything very neatly stacked up and high so that you could roll the log cars probably just off the frame to the left and, use those high platforms and neatly stacked lines to roll one log and then another onto the rail cars as you were preparing them to be shipped back to the mill. But looking at these gentlemen, they are all doing the same job and they're all dressed very similarly, from the length of their pants to the style of their shoes. One of the only differences is this gentleman in the middle has a pair of gloves on and everybody else doesn't. But I've seen this repeated, which we'll get to in the next slide. This is Goodyear Lumber Company near Hammersley in Clinton County. This is some of their railroad crews. One thing I've noticed is a lot of black among railroad crews, or very dark colors. I'm only assuming that's because working with the coal, the soot and the ash from the engine, black is probably hides the dirt and that type of debris a lot better than other colors. And for someone that may not have the opportunity to wash their clothing all that often, dark colors for the railroad crews seem to be very much in vogue. This is an interesting one. This is more than likely a picture of a jobber or a owner. You can see he's dressed a little finer than the rest of the men here. He's got his waistcoat on, some fancier pants, probably not spiked boots or cork boots, whereas these other gentlemen are very much in line with, the types of outfits we were seeing on the others. And then here in the back, you have some more of those, probably what would be referred to as Wisconsin boots again. Very high, tall leather boots, well made. Good for footing. And since he's standing on the log like that, with one foot kind of off the edge, I can almost guarantee they're corked. They've got spikes on the bottom. But, so you can sort of see that division, the boss obviously isn't doing any work. He's just supervising, but he's much better dressed than a lot of his workers. Oppose that to this image. So this is a bark shanty. This is the West Branch of Pine Creek in Potter County near the former location of Corbett. So bark shanties, sometimes peelers would work for a company. Sometimes you could peel bark on your own on a job by job basis, which is probably what we're seeing here. So, when we zoom in, you've got the whole family. You got some very young kids here. Everybody's probably living in the little bark shanty here and helping out. The style of dress, much plainer, much simpler than what we saw the presumed owner wearing in that other image. But this is probably folks that are more of a subsistence style lifestyle out here trying to make a living as best they can, and probably have very little comparatively to the jobber. This is another one. This is a image of where we sort of look at different styles, perhaps coming in from different places. We know this is a road crew or a track crew, either building a haul road or the grade for a railroad track. And we know that they're composed of a healthy amount of immigrants from Italy. So we can kind of see, perhaps these folks that are greener that haven't been here as long have a little bit different style of dress than some of the others. We're seeing more of these overalls, instead of just pants with suspenders. A couple different styles of shirts. Lots of guys with handkerchiefs wrapped around their neck. That's all things that are a little bit different than we're seeing in other places. But this is one where we specifically know that there were presumably a lot of Italian immigrants among the folks depicted in this image. So as they're coming in, they have what they have, or they have what they were able to buy in different places, maybe not the same market that the rest of the folks working in lumber camps are shopping from, and are hence clad a little bit differently. A couple more accounts to sort of back that up. I always found this one, this reporter had a way with words. It was describing his visit to the lumber camp. He says, "The lobby is furnished with benches and pegs on the wall, whereon the men hang hats, coats, socks, and etc. to dry. Gum rubber boots to fill the lobby with their soft perfume." So is really painting you a visual picture as well as a fragrance-based picture about what being in the lobby of a bunkhouse or a lumber camp might have been like. Anna Eckert has a little bit of insight on that too. She was the camp cook, and talks about the lobby as a space separate from the bunkhouse, covered in heavy clothing hanging on nails. The whole lobby was clothes. They were all over the place. The lighter clothes hung on nails upstairs in the bunkhouse. We women hung stockings over lanterns and turned the lanterns down a bit, and by morning they were nice and dry. No one had a foot locker or a wall locker. Everything was just out. The older men preferred red underwear, but the younger men preferred white. They wore long wool underwear all year round, and it didn't seem to bother them. So here again, I've got Anna's information. I've not really been able to piece a whole lot of it together, except I do have one photo, and I'm going to say I did neglect it to include it as my last slide, though I wanted to, where we have an older gentleman. That's one of the jobs we talk about in camp, is a lobby hog. So when you're too old to do work in the woods, a lobby hog will stay in camp. He will clean, sweep up, make the beds, take out trash, bring in firewood for the stoves, bring in water, help out the cook and cookie, keep the men in line, help to settle disputes. Presumably with age comes wisdom, and he's able to perhaps, people that are fighting with each other, cool them down and keep them apart, or tell a joke to sort of distract people. We do have one image of a gentleman that's much older, presumably a lobby hog, in a much darker colored shirt. It's black and white. I can't tell if it's red, but that may be one small piece of photographic evidence to back up Miss Eckert's claim about that sort of split between the old men and the young men. Talking about those Wisconsin boots and how expensive they were, one last account I have for you, and that's from Frank Botsworth, who was the storekeeper at Maston, PA in the 1920s, talking about some of the wares that they have in the store. Again, speaking of, where the Woodhicks are purchasing or acquiring the clothing. And he says, in the front of the store was the men's clothing department. Men's suits, as well as work clothing, were sold. Woolen underwear were worn by many woodsmen all year round, and it was not unusual for a man to get a complete change and throw his old clothes away. So again, perhaps not washing them as frequently as they ought to, but letting them degrade and deteriorate and then just starting over. Maybe that's because they didn't have the skills to repair them, because at that point, sewing and maintaining fabric and clothing was much more the domain of women than it was men. A good suit could be bought for $18. So again, we're looking at, for that pair of Wisconsin boots, about the same time, just about the same price, with Mr. Lynch claiming they were between $12 and $18 for a pair of boots, or you can get an entire, men's nice breast suit for $18. Work shirts were 50 cents. Overalls were 50 cents to $1. Good grade men's dress shoes could be purchased for $3.50. A large variety of ladies and children's shoes were also kept in stock. Maston was a mill town, so there were families living there, not just wood hicks in a lumber camp, although there were lots of lumber camps in the area. So obviously they were carrying objects that were catering to the other types of folks that were in that place at that time. So just a few pieces of our photographic archive, hopefully shedding some light on what wood hicks were wearing while they were working in the woods. And that's what I have for my section of the program. Again, I will open it up to questions. If you care to unmute, you are more than welcome to. If you'd like to put a question in the chat, I will read it out and we can discuss. If not, we can certainly call it an evening. We've been on here for an hour, so that's usually right in the sweet spot for a virtual program. One last call for questions. Well, all right, I hope you enjoyed this program. Again, we will have the recording available. I will send a link out to everyone that registered for the program once I have it edited and uploaded to the museum's YouTube channel. There were a few folks that did register and were obviously unable to attend. So hopefully they will be able to catch up. And thanks again for your participation. And we look forward to seeing you again, either virtually, or we would of course welcome you for a visit at the museum in person anytime. So many thanks to my co-host Josh, the other Josh at the Lumber Museum. And with that, I will stop the recording.
It's interesting.
Very
They have
interesting.
two Joshes.
Yeah. I have a book that had most